There's a vote going on the Senate floor, and I may have to go back to the floor momentarily, but let me begin our briefing. I'm gravely concerned about the information provided us just yesterday that the President received a warning in August about the threat of hijackers by Osama bin Laden and his organization. We shouldn't jump to any conclusions. Clearly, there is a lot more to be learned before we can come to any final conclusion about all of the facts, but it clearly raises some very important questions that have to be asked and have to be answered. Why did it take 8 months for us to receive this information? And secondly, what specific actions were taken by the White House in response? I think two things need to be done quickly. First, I think the President should turn over the entire briefing that he was given to the Joint Bipartisan Intelligence Committee investigation today or tomorrow at the earliest possible convenience. And secondly, I think it is important that the President release the Phoenix FBI memorandum as soon as is possible. We need to get the facts, and the sooner we can get the facts, the sooner we will have all of the answers to the many, many questions that this report raises. We will be talking here in the Senate today. I'll be meeting with my colleagues throughout the day in an effort to decide what additional actions may be required, but certainly briefing the caucus will be an important part of the ongoing effort to be sure that everybody is given the information that they need to come to some conclusions.
Senator, in light of this story, was this a failure, was 9/11 a failure of intelligence, or was it a failure to act on intelligence?
We don't know at this point. I think that is exactly why we need the intelligence briefing, why the intelligence briefing should be provided to the bipartisan intelligence investigation as quickly as possible.
Senator Daschle, has also been reported by various members of the intelligence committees, at least the senior members, that they were aware of some of this information. Do you think that the committees did enough in response?
Well, I know this, that at least so far, all of the committee members I have talked to have said they were not given any of the information we're talking about here. There obviously is a series of events and a series of circumstances involving the FBI, involving the CIA, but especially involving the White House that require a lot more thoughtful consideration prior to the time we can come to any conclusions. I'm disappointed that this information was not shared, and that's really the point. Why was it not provided to us, and why was it not shared with the general public for the last 8 months?
Probably because it's classified, right? I mean, this is a, secret briefing.
Well, I think that the information prior to 9/11 was secret, I'm sure, but after the fact that these briefings occurred, that this information was available is something that I think should have been made available to the rest of the country.
Senator, you told us earlier this year that Vice President Cheney called you and asked you not to hold wide-ranging hearings and to limit the investigation to the Intelligence Committee. Looking back, why do you think he made that call? Do you think that he knew that the White House did know something and that they were trying to keep the investigation limited because they didn't want to look culpable at all?
Well, I'm not going to come to any conclusions. It is true that the Vice President has requested on several occasions that we not have an investigation into this issue, and I know that there are many of our colleagues who on both sides of the aisle, I might say, who take a different point of view. I personally think that this issue now has become far more prominent, far more consequential, and needs to be investigated and clearly considered in a far more comprehensive way.
The story did not suggest that the President was told that somebody was going to hijack an airliner and ram it into a building. It suggested that, if I understand it, that they were aware that hijacking might be a weapon. Do you know anything more?
I do not, Bob. As I said, that's why we think it's very important for the entire briefing to be shared with the Intelligence Committee. Were that briefing to be shared, we'd have the complete story and a much better understanding than we have right now of what exactly the briefing entailed and what the President knew.
Do you have a different response now to Vice President's suggestion that you not proceed with investigations?
Well, as I told him some time ago, we would limit the investigation initially to the intelligence committees, and that's what's going on as we speak. The intelligence committees have a very important responsibility here, but I think once we get beyond the intelligence committees, there are now issues that fall outside of intelligence that somebody is going to have to examine, that somebody, I think, for the public record is going to have to try to clarify. And so I think that the issue has become one that will clearly involve other committees besides the intelligence committees today, and perhaps something even beyond committees themselves.
Senator Daschle, do you think the flying public was adequately protected in light of apparent information that there was a potential hijacking?
Well, then I'm concerned about whether or not the public was adequately protected and whether or not there was adequate information provided to the public regarding these circumstances. But again, I think it's important for us to get all of the facts and all of the information prior to the time we come to any conclusion.
Do you think you convene the caucus to talk about this, or?
No, the caucus generally convenes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so we will have an opportunity today to discuss the matter. Condi Rice was scheduled to come before the caucus, and I'm sure that she'll have an opportunity to address some of these questions today.
Would you favor about that?
Yes.
Would you favor creating a special select committee and letting investigate this in public?
It's too early to come to any conclusions about what kind of committee or what kind of an approach we might take. But clearly from an organizational point of view, and because this falls outside the purview of the Intelligence Committee itself, I think additional examination of these facts in broader forums may have merit. Again, I'm not coming to any conclusion, and I'm not making any decisions at this time.
What does that mean? I mean, more hearings?
Well, it may mean other committees, more hearings, or perhaps, as some have suggested, a commission to examine just what happened on 9/11, both before and afterwards.
Senator, by expressing your concerns so aggressively as you have today, as Mr. Gephardt did this morning, do you run the risk of this being perceived as strictly a political reaction?
Well, I would hope that what I said was something everybody here fully appreciates and understands. What I have said is that it's far too early to come to any conclusions. All we're asking for are the facts here. All we're asking for is access to the information to provide those facts. And I don't think that's too much to ask. I would think that the Republicans would be just as interested as Democrats in sharing that information, and for those of us in Congress, obtaining it.
How many times did the Vice President ask you not to investigate this, and have others at the White House also asked that there be no investigation?
Oh, I'm not sure. There were numerous times. I can't recall exactly how many.
What were his reasons?
His reasons were that the intelligence community was so involved in the aftermath of 9/11 that they didn't want to take people off of what it was they were doing to do something like this. I respect that, but I just feel that if we could do it in World War II, after war was declared, and as we attempted to find out what happened at Pearl Harbor, we ought to be able to do it now.
So he asked you, just to make sure I'm clear on this, he asked you more than once?
Correct.
And was it more than twice?
Bob, it was 3.5 times. Yeah.
And it was
I
no
don't-
investigation whatsoever. He wasn't asking for it to keep it closed, to keep it to intelligence. He wanted no investigation.
That's correct.
And didn't the president also, I remember him following up with you at a breakfast and reiterating what the vice president called you about?
That's correct.
So the president himself asked you.
That's right.
Senator Daschle, you called the White House
Senator
today.
Daschle, over the last 8 months, and you talked about 9/11. Did you ever specifically say, Mr. President, what did you know before 9/11? Did you ever give him an opening to share this information with you or with Congress? And also, can you talk about how or whether you think that the President's decision to withhold that, at least apparently from most members of Congress, for the last 8 months, was a deliberate attempt on his part not to share that with Congress, or do you think it's just an oversight, or maybe he didn't know, or just talk about that a little bit?
Well, the White House had said publicly that they were not briefed, that they had no information prior to 9/11. that was pretty clear. In fact, I was just shown again a transcript of it this morning of one of the times when the White House had publicly so stated. So I guess we...
Specifically, I mean, you had breakfast, you met with
Right.
the president one-on-one. I'm just curious whether in your conversations with him, not what the White House released, but when you were face-to-face with the president, either at breakfast or at another session, did this ever come up in the context
It may
of...
have. I don't know that it ever... I don't know that a direct question, what did you know and when did you know it, was ever asked of the President of the United States. I think there was a general feeling, given what we were told during these breakfasts and briefings, that there wasn't any clear indication that reports of this kind were available. And that was, again, confirmed in the public statements made by the White House. So I have a very difficult time reconciling what we now know to be the fact with what was given to be our understanding based upon both private and public briefings. But nonetheless, I think that that's why we need to find the transcript, why we need to have the information released, so that we're in a much better position to make a decision.
So in those
were you misled or were you lied to?
I'm not going to make any definitive judgment on that. I think it is important for us to get all the information. There may be an explanation. If there is, we need to have it. I'm ready to listen to any plausible explanation as to how we can reconcile what was our understanding with what now is being reported.
So in the public statements, you've just been going over these transcripts, was the White House misleading the public by saying it had no prior information? And I also just want you to clarify Cheney's statement, no investigation whatsoever, not merely a private investigation. I had thought earlier that he wanted to make sure this was kept, a private intelligence committee investigation.
Well, the impression that the Vice President left with me is that he would prefer no investigation. And then when we pursued the matter, I told him that we had no choice but to move forward with the Intelligence Committee investigation as is now occurring. And the White House didn't formally object to that. They made clear their concerns, but I think that to my recollection, there was never a time when the White House said we just oppose what it is you're doing. But they did ask that we not do it in the first place.
And on those public statements, the transcripts you've been looking at, in light of what we now know, was the White House misleading the public?
Jonathan, I'm not going to make any decision about that. What I said was that we need to get all of the information, we need to get all of the facts prior to the time we make any decision. And that includes decisions like that.
Do you have any assessment of to what degree the White House is cooperating with the Intelligence Committee investigation at this point?
Well, the impression I've had is that, by and large, there has been cooperation, although I know that there's been a request for a lot of additional information that is yet to be turned over. I wouldn't necessarily term that as an unwillingness, but the information hasn't all been forthcoming, at least to date.
Senator Daschle, have you called anyone at the White House to ask yourself for this, for the full contents of this briefing?
I think at the staff level the request has been made. I have not personally made it.
What do you think the administration would have or could have done in light of the briefing they received?
Well, Ellen, that's a good question, and it's one that I hope we can answer down the road. It's certainly not one I can answer this morning.
I'll try this another way. You said that nobody asked the President or the Vice President what did he know, when he know it. But at any point in your conversations with the President or the Vice President, did they ever volunteer that they had some kind of warning?
They did not. There was no information that was ever shared with us that I can recall.
What do you think the President wants to say to the public? I mean, you've asked some specific records, but does he owe the American public any detailed statement about what this all means about 9/11?
Well, as I said at the beginning, I think the administration ought to do two things today. The first and most important is to release the Phoenix memo regarding the FBI report. As you know, this is one of two reports. There was also a Minnesota memo, very similar in nature, that pointed out that there were those who clearly are suspect, and connecting the dots is something I think this administration needs to do with the release of that information. The second thing that would be very helpful and could be done today is the release of the intelligence briefing that the President received to the Joint Bipartisan Intelligence Committee. If the President were to announce that he's sharing that information today, I think it would go a long way to help us answer some of these questions and come to some conclusion about what happened and why it happened.
Can you think of a justifiable explanation for why the White House would not have acknowledged this briefing until now?
I cannot, but that doesn't mean there isn't one. As I say, I'm not going to jump to any conclusions, but it's hard to understand why the information was not released.
Can you just clarify, when you say release the briefing, do you mean documents that were shared, or would you like, if there was a transcript made, would you like that shared? What are you looking for specifically?
Generally briefings include both an oral presentation as well as documents. I think the entire briefing ought to be shared with the intelligence committees in this investigation. This is exactly the kind of thing they're looking into. This is exactly what they were hoping to better understand, and I don't know of a document that would shed better light on this whole matter than that particular briefing.
Just to clarify, Senator, are you talking about the potential of a blue ribbon commission to look into this whole thing?
That's a possibility. Other senators have proposed it. I personally have not come to any conclusion about what would be the best way to approach this matter, but clearly a commission similar to the Pearl Harbor Commission is something that many people have proposed and I think has greater merit today than it had a few weeks ago. I'm sorry?
Appointed by?
Well, appointed either by the Congress or by the Congress and the President. Certainly we would want to have some role in who gets appointed. This is a commission that I think would have to be as impartial and bipartisan or nonpartisan as we could create it.
And this is a recommendation that's been made prior to the bench.
These are a number of senators, Senator Torricelli, Senator Lieberman, other senators have proposed the commission idea, and it is one that I think we have to look at more carefully now.
More so than a select committee?
Correct.
The United States has been known for a long time, certainly more than 4 years. And the Terrorism Subcommittee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is chaired by Senator Feinstein, has known about it and had access to confidential information. And the fact that Middle Eastern terrorists would hijack U.S. planes is obviously something that this country has contended with for decades. What's new about connecting Osama bin Laden and possible hijackings in the standard sense? Why does that raise any particular red flag?
Well, there have been other reports that related to other incidences that triggered attention and triggered action. And obviously, when you have as much of this information that comes together in the form that it did, it seems to me that following up first is something that we would just assume, and secondly, sharing the information once it has occurred is something that would also be, I think, a matter of assumption. So I think, as I said at the beginning, these are questions that have to be answered, and to the extent possible, the information relating to these questions has to be shared. So until it is, it's awfully hard for us to come to any conclusions.
Senator, do you think it's sufficient, and you may have answered this way, I can relate, is it sufficient to have it shared now simply to the intelligence committees and the investigation that they're running, or does it have to now be done in the open?
Well, as I said, I think it is important that it be done in the open, that to a larger extent now than what was originally understood, this is more than just an intelligence issue. And because it is more than just an intelligence issue, it seems to me that more than just the intelligence committees, as effective as they have been in trying to put all of the pieces together, ought to be involved.
Senator Daschle, Senator Lott just told Fox News a moment ago that the Senate Intelligence Committee was aware of the same type of information that the President had in advance of 9/11, and that these types of intelligence briefings were widely disseminated. Were you aware of that information?
I was not. That's not my understanding, but that's another issue that we'll have to clarify.
What would it mean if the oversight committees were aware of this information as well, and as others did not, were unable to come to a conclusion or a complete analysis?
I don't know that anyone can tell you what it would mean at this point. I think that you're asking a lot of good questions that over a period of time ought to be answered, and ought to be answered with a lot more clarity than we can do this morning. But I think that is the issue. Can we put all of the pieces together? And the only way we're going to do that is for the White House and everybody else who have had direct knowledge, share what they know and allow us to put this picture together with greater clarity than we have today.
I assume the Intelligence Committee should also release it if they got a similar briefing.
Of course.
That should be released as well.
Sure. Thank you all.
Okay. Good.